This is a male protagonist who most deserves to turn dark that I've ever seen. Because his master and lover was not only humiliated by humans, but also publicly executed by the king. Even after death, her body was displayed and beheaded. So, the once powerless protagonist fully embraced the dark side. Although he suffered through 10 years of imprisonment, living was worse than death. But today, he finally broke free from his confinement. And the first thing he decided to do was massacre humanity. To achieve his goal, he would stop at nothing. It turns out that long ago, God created humans. But at the same time, he also created witches. Although God granted the witches power to protect humanity, as technology advanced, humans began to fear the witches' power. To eliminate potential threats, they decided to exterminate the witches entirely. Although the protagonist is human, he still fled together with his witch master, Chloe, embarking on a journey of escape. Because the protagonist often wore a gloomy expression, the optimistic Chloe would often tell jokes to cheer him up. Even though she teased about finding him a girlfriend, they both secretly understood their feelings for each other. However, the protagonist couldn't understand how she could remain so cheerful in their situation. If it were him, he would have already used magic to annihilate humanity. But while they were chatting, the border guards discovered them and gave chase. Though armed with modern weapons, they posed no challenge for the protagonist. Just as he was about to act, Chloe stopped him, saying his magic was not yet mature. Silver Staff. Meanwhile, on the other side, after learning that the border guards were wiped out, the king did not continue the pursuit, because he had an even more malicious plan. Sure enough, although Chloe instantly annihilated the pursuers, their location was also exposed. Completely unaware of this, the protagonist began complaining at this moment about why Chloe wouldn't let him fight. But before Chloe could explain, they were suddenly teleported into the sky by a strange magic circle. Chloe immediately realized something was wrong, because as far as she knew, this was a human-invented hyperspace teleportation device. Using satellites alone, it could transport targets to a designated location. At the same time, the king had already begun his speech. He not only blamed all sins on the witches, but also incited humanity, slaughtering the witches who once helped them. Under the king's brainwashing, everyone became extremely excited, but little did they know, all of this was another woman's scheme. Almost at the same time, the protagonist and Chloe were teleported to the Empire's central square. Seeing the king in front of him, the protagonist immediately understood their current situation. Because he was human, he decided to buy time for Chloe to escape. But the protagonist was still just a child. He was overpowered by the soldiers before he could even use his magic. The king's actions completely enraged Chloe. If you still value the lives of your citizens, then release my disciple immediately. Right now. Your silence is your answer. Humans, you are the same as Adonis, also humans. I don't want to destroy you. But if everything is destroyed, the place he will return to will be gone, so, to let him live. Your existence is too dangerous. But Chloe couldn't believe it. Her magic had disappeared. It turns out the king had prepared countermeasures from the beginning. So no matter how Chloe resisted, she was already meat on the chopping block. Chloe. At this moment, unable to use magic, Chloe had become a clown in the eyes of humans. They even raised their phones to capture her most pitiful and helpless state. Everyone was utterly deranged. Their grotesque faces were more evil than anyone else's. But even though the protagonist tried his best, with his current strength, he could do nothing. King, unwilling to waste more time, ordered his men to kill the protagonist immediately. Witnessing the scene before him, Chloe completely broke down. She knelt before the king without hesitation. She took all the blame upon herself. She even claimed that the protagonist was raised as her slave. At this moment, Chloe abandoned all her dignity, just to save the one she loved. If it were possible, she was willing to do anything. Watching this scene, the protagonist was in tears. He kept writing spells with his hand, hoping for a miracle to happen at this moment. But the king mercilessly pulled out a gun, and pointed it at Chloe's head. Adonis. Thank you for everything. Back then, with you. Meeting you was the best thing. As the gunshot rang out, Chloe died right before the protagonist's eyes. But the king did not intend to stop there. Under his command, the soldiers raised their weapons high. They ruthlessly attacked Chloe's body. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, the protagonist sank into utter despair. At this moment, he recalled all the memories of life with Chloe. If humans didn't exist, perhaps they could have been the happiest of all. After witnessing himself lose everything, the protagonist's hatred for humanity reached its peak. He swore to himself that one day, he would personally destroy all of humanity. Time passed, and 10 years went by. The witch's extermination didn't bring peace. Even with unprecedented technological advancements, humans continued to wage wars. Countless female captives were enslaved. They were not only starved, but also reduced to toys for the nobles. However, a girl named Doroka remained optimistic. Whenever her friend Anna felt down, she would do everything she could to comfort her. But just at that moment, the soldiers came to select toys for the nobles again. They called for number 218, but no one responded. Everyone was terrified, but little did they know, Anna was number 218. So, for the sake of her friend, Doroka chose to step forward alone. She was quickly taken to the warden's room. Facing the warden's order to strip off her clothes, Doroka froze in place. Seeing the other girls tortured beyond recognition, Doroka wished she could kill him right there. Seizing the moment while the warden was taking a photo, she bit his hand hard. Then, in the chaos, she grabbed his phone. After several attempts, Doroka finally cracked the phone's security at the last moment. First, she opened all the prison gates. Then, taking advantage of the ensuing chaos, she ran alone to the innermost room of the prison. But as soon as she got inside, she was stunned by what she saw. Before she could react, the soldiers who had chased her pinned her to the ground. The soldiers looked particularly panicked. They seemed especially afraid of the man confined in the device. That is, on the very first day of his escape, he began ruthlessly killing humans without hesitation. It's him. At the same time, after learning about this, the military deployed their forces to capture the protagonist. They also sent one of their strongest officers, Eckhart. Although he appeared harmless on the surface, his methods were extremely cruel. Every mission he undertook resulted in indiscriminate killing. Meanwhile, the protagonist recovered his magical pen. With a casual wave of his hand, he wrote a string of magic-infused spells out of thin air. Scripted summoning magic. Amplification. Scripted summoning magic amplification. What's wrong? Meanwhile, the female lead also escaped from the shelter. Seeing the chaos created by the protagonist, her overly compassionate heart was filled with guilt. She even blamed herself for everything that had happened. But for the protagonist, the earlier attack was far from enough. Because if it weren't for the foolish humans, he wouldn't have become like this. Even though 10 years had passed, he still couldn't forget everything that happened that day, and the words his master said before her death. As the protagonist activated his scripted magic, the ground around him began to crack open. A giant arm emerged from beneath the ground. It was summoned through his scripted summoning magic. The city was no match for the giant. With just a casual swipe of its arm, an entire street was instantly destroyed. Even as countless humans lay dead or injured, the protagonist showed no signs of stopping. He commanded the colossal being to advance step by step toward the palace, mercilessly destroying the city along the way. Seeing that things couldn't continue like this, the military began to take necessary measures. Tanks were the first to join the battle, but their shells veered off course. It was as if the giant was shielded by a barrier, making it impossible to harm the protagonist in any way. With just a single punch from the giant, all the tanks and nearby structures were obliterated instantly. It turns out that during his 10 long years of imprisonment, the protagonist had simulated countless battles in his mind. He also studied and developed various magic formulas through thought. Since the only way humans could use magic was through scripted summoning magic, the protagonist analyzed the structure of magic and nearly mastered all magical formulas. Now, all he wants is to avenge the woman he loved and completely annihilate the humans of this nation. If killing her is what you call justice. Then you are all equally guilty. Scripted summoning magic. Bell of Judgment. An eye for an eye, right? It's him. Make it even more thrilling. But as the protagonist was distracted, Eckhart, from a distance, locked onto his location. Soon, fighter jets arrived overhead. They launched missiles, unleashing a fierce assault on the giant. Caught off guard, the protagonist was forced to abandon the giant to draw enemy fire. Although he created conditions for his own escape, he had no intention of running away. First, he used magic to disrupt the plane's signals. Then, he crashed them all. Next, he leapt down, brutally slaughtering the entire army in the simplest way. But just then, a sharp voice suddenly called out from behind him. Protagonist couldn't believe it. The idiot trying to stop him was the woman he had saved from prison. And the woman seemed unaware of the gravity of the situation. She kept accusing the protagonist of slaughtering the innocent. Hearing such nonsense, the infuriated protagonist immediately crushed the enemy's head. Then he slowly walked toward the woman. At this moment, he wanted nothing more than to strangle the hateful woman in front of him. The protagonist grabbed the woman and lifted her up, repeatedly questioning who she was defending. Clearly, she was a useless fool who understood nothing, yet insisted on acting like a saint. But just as he was about to act, the woman suddenly used magic, and confessed that she was a witch. Hearing this absurd revelation, the already irrational protagonist became even angrier. At this moment, he vented all his resentment onto the woman, wanting to strangle her on the spot. But the woman suddenly claimed that she had a way to bring his dead master back to life. This not only failed to calm the protagonist down, but also pushed him over the edge. To the protagonist, no one had the right to talk about his master. And how could the dead possibly come back to life? Are you mocking me? But despite the murderous intent in his eyes, the woman remained calm. Instead, she smiled as if ready to embrace death. Seeing the scene before him, the protagonist felt as though he had returned to the day his master died. At this moment, he could no longer hold back. The 10 years of longing for his master made him choose to believe everything the woman said. You are no longer alone, Adonis. Too heartbreaking. Couldn't make it a double kill under the same roof.